Hello everyone, and welcome back. Whether you're listening while driving home, doing housework, taking a quiet walk, or lying in bed after a long day, thank you for being here. I hope these next few minutes can be a peaceful little pause in your day, wherever you are. Today, I'd like to ask you a simple question. Have you ever felt excited about changing your life, only to feel completely overwhelmed a few days later? Maybe you wanted to improve your English. Maybe you wanted to become healthier. Maybe you wanted to wake up earlier, read more books, or simply become a calmer version of yourself. At first, everything felt possible. You made a plan, set a goal, and imagined the person you wanted to become. But after a while, that excitement slowly became pressure. The goal that once inspired you suddenly felt too big, and instead of taking the first step, you found yourself standing still. I think many of us have experienced that feeling. Imagine standing at the bottom of a mountain. The morning air is cool, the sky is clear, and somewhere above you is the place you've always wanted to reach. You can't see the top very clearly because it's hidden behind the clouds, but you know it's there. For a moment, you simply look. Then, something interesting happens. Instead of thinking about your first step, your mind begins thinking about the entire journey. How many hours will it take? What if the path is too difficult? What if I get tired halfway? What if I never make it to the top? Before you've even started climbing, you're already carrying the weight of the whole mountain. Maybe that's why so many dreams feel impossible. Not because they truly are, but because we're trying to carry tomorrow, next month, and next year, all at the same time. A few years ago, I learned this lesson in a very ordinary way. One evening, I came home after a long day at work. My apartment wasn't dirty, but it was messy enough to make me feel uncomfortable. There were dishes in the sink, books on the table, clothes on a chair, and papers covering my desk. Nothing was terrible on its own, but together they felt like one giant problem. I stood there for a while, looking around the room. The more I looked, the more tired I felt. I told myself I should clean everything. The kitchen, the bedroom, the desk, the floor, everything. But I didn't move. Instead, I made a cup of tea, sat on the couch, and spent the evening doing almost anything, except the one thing I had planned to do. Have you ever noticed how easily we do that? Sometimes we're not avoiding the work itself. We're avoiding the feeling that comes before the work, the feeling that whispers, "This is too much." The next evening, nothing had changed. The dishes were still there. The papers were still on the desk. The clothes were still waiting for me. But this time, I made a different decision. I walked over to my desk and cleaned just one small corner. That was all. I didn't touch the kitchen. I didn't clean the bedroom. I didn't even finish the desk. Just one corner. It took less than 10 minutes. When I stepped back, something surprised me. The apartment still looked messy, but it didn't feel overwhelming anymore. The problem hadn't become smaller. I had, or maybe I had become just a little stronger. Because I had stopped looking at the whole mountain. I had taken one step. And once you've taken the first step, the second one doesn't seem nearly as difficult. I think that's how real change begins. Not with a dramatic decision, not with endless motivation, and certainly not with a perfect plan. It begins the moment we stop asking, "How do I change my whole life?" and start asking, "What's the next small thing I can do?" It's such a simple question, but sometimes a simple question can change the direction of an entire life. Imagine walking through a forest at night with nothing but a small flashlight. The light doesn't show you the end of the path. It doesn't show you the entire forest. It only shows the next few steps. And somehow, those few steps are enough. You take one, then another, and another. Before you know it, you've walked much farther than you ever thought possible. Perhaps life is like that too. We don't need to see the whole journey. We only need enough light for the next step. So today, don't worry about reaching the top of your mountain. Don't worry about changing your whole life before next month. Just ask yourself one gentle question. What is the next step? Maybe it's reading one page. Maybe it's listening to 10 minutes of English. Maybe it's drinking one more glass of water. Maybe it's simply getting out of bed and opening the curtains. It doesn't have to be a big step. It doesn't even have to be an impressive step. It only needs to be the next one. Because every mountain, no matter how high it is, has always been climbed the same way. One step, then another, and another. Can I share another thought with you? Imagine standing on a quiet beach early in the morning. The waves move gently toward the shore. The wind is soft. The world feels calm. Out on the water, a small boat begins its journey. At first, it hardly seems to move. You watch it for a minute, then another. It is still there, almost in the same place. If someone looked away after only a few moments, they might smile and say, "It hasn't gone anywhere," but stay a little longer. Watch carefully. 10 minutes later, the boat is much farther away. An hour later, it has become only a tiny shape on the horizon. The boat never rushed. It never made a dramatic turn. It simply kept moving. I think real change is often like that. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens so quietly that we almost miss it. Maybe that's why so many people give up too early. They expect progress to be exciting. They expect to feel different after a few days. When they don't, they assume nothing is happening. So they stop. But what if something is happening? What if the most important part of change happens long before we can see it? Think about learning English. The first conversation still feels difficult. You still search for words. You still make mistakes. Sometimes you listen to a podcast and understand only half of it. It can feel disappointing. You begin asking yourself, am I really getting better? The answer is yes, just not in a way you can easily measure today. Every new word becomes part of your vocabulary. Every sentence trains your ears a little more. Every mistake teaches your brain something new. Each lesson is small, almost invisible, but together they begin to change you. The same is true for almost everything worth learning. A musician doesn't wake up one morning able to play beautifully. A runner doesn't become strong after one jog. A writer doesn't create a great book in a single afternoon. They simply return again and again and again. Sometimes we think success belongs to people with extraordinary talent. I don't believe that's completely true. I think success often belongs to people who are willing to do ordinary things for a very long time. There is something beautiful about ordinary days. They don't feel important. Nobody applauds them. Nobody notices them. But ordinary days quietly become extraordinary years. Imagine looking at an old photograph of yourself, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10. You don't notice yourself changing from one day to the next. But one photograph beside another tells a different story. The change is impossible to miss. Life rarely changes in one unforgettable moment. It changes through thousands of moments that feel completely ordinary. That's why 1% matters. Not because 1% is impressive, but because 1% is possible. Anyone can become 1% kinder today. 1% healthier, 1% more patient, 1% more curious, 1% more consistent. These changes are so small that they don't scare us. And because they don't scare us, we actually do them. The little things we repeat become the big things we achieve. Imagine the captain of that small boat again. Every morning, before the journey begins, he checks the wind. He adjusts the sail. He holds the wheel. Sometimes, he changes direction by only a tiny amount. So small that nobody on the shore would ever notice. But after many days at sea, that tiny adjustment leads him to a completely different destination. Our lives work the same way. Every choice is a small adjustment. Every habit is a quiet decision about the direction we're heading. One page instead of none. One short walk instead of staying on the couch. One English lesson instead of saying, "I'll start tomorrow." None of these choices change your life today, but they are changing where your life is going. And perhaps that's the most encouraging thought of all. You don't need to make a huge change tonight. You don't need to become a completely different person this month. You only need to keep your boat moving. A little today, a little tomorrow, and a little the day after that. Because one day, you'll look back across the water. The shore where you started will be far behind you. Not because you moved quickly, but because you never stopped moving. And sometimes, that is all it takes to reach a different life. Can I tell you about one of the smallest promises I ever made to myself? There was a time when I wanted to walk every morning. It sounded like such a simple habit. Wake up, put on my shoes, go outside, walk for 30 minutes. That was the plan. Every night before bed, I told myself, tomorrow morning, I'll finally start. But morning came. The alarm rang. I opened my eyes, and suddenly, the bed felt warmer than ever. The room was quiet. Outside, the air looked cold. I looked at my shoes by the door and thought, maybe tomorrow. For days, nothing changed. Not because I didn't want to walk. I really did. But every morning, I imagined the entire walk before I even stood up. 30 minutes, cold air, a long road. It felt like too much. Then, one evening, I asked myself a different question. What if I didn't have to go for a walk? What if all I had to do was put on my shoes? That sounded almost silly. Surely putting on a pair of shoes couldn't change anything. But the next morning, that's exactly what I did. I sat on the edge of the bed, reached for my shoes, tied the laces, and then I just sat there. I smiled because I had already kept my promise. For the first time in days, I hadn't failed. After a few seconds, I looked at the door. I thought, well, I'm already wearing my shoes. So I opened the door, stepped outside, walked to the end of the street, then around the corner, then a little farther. That morning, I walked for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I forced myself, but because starting had become easier than stopping. I think that's true for many things in life. Beginning is often the hardest part. Imagine standing beside a lake on a cool morning. You want to go swimming. You know the water will be cold, so you wait. You put one foot forward, then you pull it back. You tell yourself you'll get in after 1 more minute. Then another minute passes. The water hasn't changed. Only your fear has grown. Finally, you take a deep breath and step in. For a few seconds, the water feels cold, very cold. But then, something happens. Your body adjusts. The cold no longer feels shocking. A minute later, you're swimming. The thing that frightened you a moment ago has become something you're enjoying. Starting often feels exactly like that. It's uncomfortable, not because the task is impossible, but because your mind hasn't crossed the doorway yet. Most people think they need more motivation. Maybe what they really need is a smaller beginning. We often make promises that are too big. I'll study for 2 hours. I'll read 50 pages. I'll exercise every single day. Those promises sound inspiring, but they also sound heavy. Heavy promises are easy to postpone. Small promises are easier to keep. Read 1 page, write 1 sentence. Listen to 1 English conversation. Stretch for 2 minutes. Drink 1 glass of water. Simple, almost ordinary, but ordinary actions have a quiet kind of power. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, you build trust. Not trust in other people, trust in yourself. You begin to believe, I'm someone who does what I say I'll do. That belief is worth much more than 1 perfect workout or 1 long study session, because habits are not built in 1 extraordinary day. They're built through hundreds of ordinary mornings. The mornings when you're tired, the mornings when you're busy, the mornings when you don't feel like doing anything at all. Those mornings matter the most. Anyone can keep a habit when life feels easy. The real change happens on ordinary days. Days when nobody is watching. Days when you quietly choose to begin anyway. So tonight, don't ask yourself, how can I become a different person? Ask yourself something much smaller. What is 1 promise so small that I know I can keep it tomorrow? Maybe it's putting on your shoes. Maybe it's opening your English book. Maybe it's listening to this podcast for 5 minutes. Whatever it is, make it small, make it gentle, make it easy to begin. Because sometimes the biggest changes in our lives begin with something as simple as opening a door. Can I ask you 1 last question? When you look in the mirror, who do you see? Most of us answer that question without saying a word. We carry a quiet story about ourselves. Maybe it's a story that says, I'm always late. I'm not very confident. I've never been good at learning languages. I always give up. Sometimes we've repeated these thoughts for so many years that they begin to feel like facts. But are they? Or are they simply stories we've told ourselves for a very long time? Imagine walking through a field after fresh snow. Everything is white, untouched. Then someone walks across it. A single line of footprints appears. The next day, another person follows the same path. Then another, then another. Before long, a clear trail forms across the field. Everyone naturally walks there because the path already exists. Our minds work in a similar way. Every thought leaves a footprint. Every action leaves another. The more often we repeat something, the easier it becomes to follow the same path again. That's why change can feel so difficult. Not because we're broken, but because we've been walking the same path for years. The beautiful thing is, a new path can always be made. At first, it feels strange. You step into the deep snow. There is no clear trail. Every step takes a little more effort. Sometimes, you wonder if it's worth it. But each time you choose that new direction, the path becomes a little easier to walk. I think habits are like those footprints. Every small action quietly tells your brain something about who you are. When you read one page, you're not just reading, you're becoming someone who learns. When you go for a short walk, you're not only exercising, you're becoming someone who takes care of their body. When you spend 10 minutes listening to English, you're not simply studying, you're becoming someone who doesn't give up. The funny thing is, most of these moments don't feel important. Nobody celebrates them. Nobody sees them. But they matter. They matter because they slowly change the story you tell yourself. One day, instead of saying, "I wish I were more confident," you notice something different. You speak up in a meeting. You order coffee in English without feeling nervous. You try something that once scared you. And afterwards, you smile, not because everything was perfect, but because you realize you're not the same person you were before. Change rarely arrives with a loud announcement. It whispers, quietly, one decision at a time, one habit at a time, one ordinary day after another. Imagine an old stone staircase leading to the top of a hill. Nobody built it in a single afternoon. One stone was placed, then another, then another. For a long time, it probably didn't even look like a staircase, just a few stones on the ground. But years later, those same stones became something that thousands of people could climb. Our lives are built the same way. One promise kept, one kind decision, one page read, one morning walk, one English lesson. These moments are the stones. Every time you choose them, you're building something. Not just better habits, a better version of yourself. So perhaps the question isn't, how do I change my life? Perhaps the better question is, what kind of person am I becoming today? Because whether we notice it or not, every small choice is helping answer that question. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll wake up and discover that the person you once hoped to become has quietly become the person you are. Before we finish today, I'd like to leave you with one final story. Imagine you're walking through a forest. It's early in the morning. The air is cool. Birds are beginning to sing. Sunlight slips gently through the trees. The path in front of you is quiet. As you walk, you suddenly trip over a small rock. You lose your balance. For a moment, you stop. You brush the dirt from your hands. Then you look down at the path. Now imagine doing something different. Imagine sitting down beside that rock and saying, "I guess my journey is over." It sounds strange, doesn't it? No one would do that. No one would let one small stumble decide the rest of the journey. Yet somehow, many of us do exactly that in life. We miss one workout, so we stop exercising. We skip one English lesson, so we stop learning. We have one difficult day, and we begin to believe we've failed. But one difficult day doesn't erase all the days that came before it. One missed habit doesn't erase the person you're becoming. It simply means today was difficult, nothing more. Tomorrow is still waiting for you. There is a quiet idea that I have always loved. Never miss twice. Not because life should be perfect, but because every new day gives us another chance to begin again. Maybe yesterday didn't go the way you hoped. That's all right. Come back today. Maybe this morning felt heavy. That's all right. Take one small step this afternoon. Maybe you've been away from your goals for weeks. That's all right too. The path is still there, waiting. It has never asked you to be perfect. It has only asked you to keep walking. I think we are often much harder on ourselves than we would ever be with someone we love. If a friend were learning English and forgot a few words, would you tell them to quit? Of course not. You would smile. You would encourage them. You would remind them how far they've already come. So why don't we offer ourselves the same kindness? Growth is not a straight line. It never has been. Some days you'll move quickly. Some days you'll barely move at all. And some days, rest is exactly what you need. Rest is not failure. Slowing down is not failure. Beginning again is not failure. Giving up on yourself is the only thing that truly stops the journey. When I think about everything we've talked about today, one image keeps coming back to me. A mountain, a quiet boat crossing the sea, a pair of walking shoes waiting by the door, footprints in fresh snow. Each image tells the same story in a different way. Real change is quiet. It rarely arrives with applause. It doesn't ask you to become a different person overnight. Instead, it asks something much smaller. Will you take one more step? Will you make one more kind choice? Will you keep one small promise to yourself today? That's all. And perhaps that's enough. Before we say goodbye, I'd like you to imagine one last picture. It's just before sunrise. The world is still. The sky is painted with soft shades of blue and gold. Nothing feels rushed. The sun doesn't hurry. It doesn't compete with yesterday. It simply rises every single morning, quietly, patiently, faithfully. Maybe we can learn something from that. Maybe life isn't asking us to shine all at once. Maybe it's simply asking us to keep showing up, a little brighter than yesterday, a little kinder than yesterday, a little wiser than yesterday. One small step, one ordinary day, one quiet promise at a time. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Whether you're listening on your way home, taking a walk, washing the dishes, or resting after a long day, I'm truly grateful you're here. I hope today's conversation reminded you that you don't need to change your whole life tonight. You don't need to climb the whole mountain. You don't need to have everything figured out. You only need to take the next step. Because sometimes the smallest step you take today becomes the beginning of a life you never imagined. Take good care of yourself. Keep moving at your own pace, and I'll see you again in the next episode.